Chapter 22 of Ester Ried's Namesake. Ester Ried's Namesake by Pansy. Chapter 22. Why She Quit. For Professor Langham had been in thorough earnest. It had taken him some time to decide this for himself. He had weighed carefully, and with more attention to detail than young men in his frame of mind generally succeed in giving, the disadvantages in the situation. On such a subject it is something to be able to own that there are disadvantages. This man owned to them frankly. Esther Randall, he admitted, had been educated on narrow lines. Her father was a home missionary of the radical or fanatical sort, and had succeeded to a remarkable degree in permeating his daughter's mind with his ideas. Her work in college, well done though it was, evidently counted for little, so far, as compared with the molding process that had been going on for years in her home. It was undeniable that he and she differed radically with regard to matters of some importance. As he came to know her more intimately, was it not probable that other points of difference would appear? Was it not altogether possible that these differences would make a difficult problem of life together? Mr. Langham had taken months to study this matter, and had finally reached the conclusion that, differ though they might and must, Esther Randall was the one woman in the world whom he wanted for himself. He came back from his long vacation fully resolved upon this course of action, and making not the slightest provision for possible decisions that Esther might have reached in the meantime. In truth, Mr. Langham, without being consciously or in the least oppressively conceited, had yet a conviction, or an impression, that he would be able to win any girl on whom he chose to fix his affections. The estimate in which he had heretofore been held in his world justified such an impression. He was eager to walk home with Esther on the first evening of the new year, and almost resented her spending the night with her friends. Why could she not have changed a plan of so little consequence when she saw his evident disappointment? In that case they could have seen the girl safely home, and had the long walk back together. As he walked back to Mr. Kimball's alone that evening, he told himself that, as soon as he had the right to criticize Esther on other matters than her studies, he should tell her plainly that such coyness was unworthy of her, and savored of the very young girl or the conscious flirt. But he never told her anything of the kind. Her "coyness" increased upon her to such an extent, and she grew so skillful in managing, that the weeks passed without his having secured that interview which he had meant to have at once. There were times when Mr. Langham was so annoyed by the state of things as to be almost tempted to feel that he had been mistaken in his estimate of this girl. How could any girl of refinement steadily plan to circumvent and annoy a man who had plainly made known his desires and intentions? Did she think to tease him into a more open manifestation of his regard for her, and thereby give the entire college a chance to gossip about their affairs? But that thought was unworthy of her. She had never shown the slightest tendency toward common coquetry; nor did she now, he was obliged to own. Nothing could be quieter or more correct than her manner. She was even careful not to shun him conspicuously, and yet, contrive as he might, that strictly private interview could not be arranged in the incidental way that he desired to bring it about, nor indeed in any way unless he risked a definite request to see her alone at a given time, and he shrank from that. Who could tell but, in her present mood, she might decline to make an appointment with him? Meantime Esther was by no means coquetting, nor did she misunderstand the character of Mr. Langham's interest in her. What she was trying to do was to learn, not her own heart (there were times when she felt painfully sure of that), but the right way. Certain homely words of Melindy's persisted in repeating themselves in her brain. "Then, of course, I quit," Melindy had said. The occasion was when she had discovered that she and Jim Slicer could not "walk together in a way to please him." Discovering this, she had "quit" with as much promptness and directness as she would have shown with regard to any other duty. Evidently Melindy had never learned that love is an exceptional passion, not subject to guidance and control, but must sway the creature whither it will, without regard to duty or even propriety. Esther Randall's problem to the looker on would not have appeared by any means so simple as Melindy's from an ethical standpoint, for whereas Jim Slicer did not believe much in the Bible and laughed about praying, was not Mr. Langham a professor of religion and a Bible teacher? What more could a reasonable being desire? Yet Esther, mentally quoting Melindy again, knew there were "lots of things" about which they did not agree, things which she believed were vital to her spiritual growth. Moreover, she felt, rather than realized, that if they were much together, it would be she, and not he, who would slowly change. And yet, a whole volume of possible self-renunciation and pain were wrapped up in those two short words. While she still hesitated, sure of but one thing, that she must not accept Mr. Langham's personal advances while she was still in a doubtful mind, there came a week that quickened her spiritual nature and placed some things in a clearer light. By invitation of a number of the leading churches in the town, there came a man of national reputation to lead an 8 days' series of Bible meetings, avowedly for the purpose of deepening the Christian life in individuals and of winning outsiders to Christ. On the part of the pastors an earnest effort was made to have their people set apart these 8 days to the service of the church, so far as possible. Even Dr. Armitage, who was not supposed to look favorably on special efforts of any kind, and who had not united in the original call for these meetings, still gave courteous notice of them from his pulpit, and urged upon his people the wisdom of attending at least some of them. After the first day or two the character of the meetings and the undoubted scholarship, as well as spirituality of the leader, won even the indifferent to interest, and the attendance was excellent. Several of the college professors spoke in unstinted praise of the Bible expositions, and of the methods employed in the meetings, urging upon the students to give to them what time they could spare. To this end they extended the date of an examination, and gave out less work than usual. But Mr. Langham was not numbered among these professors. He said not a word against the meetings, and not a word in their praise. He seemed unable to spare any evenings for them. Not only this, but he gave his personal support to, and was present at, a social function on the evening when it had been announced that the meeting would be in the interest of college students. Some one made bold to ask him why he did this, and it was reported that he said the social function had been planned before the meetings were announced, and also that religious specialization of this sort was not, in his judgment, in very good taste. Whatever else that series of meetings may have accomplished, they convinced Esther Randall that she and Melindy were having a like experience. She owned to her own heart that, like Melindy, she cared a heap, and could care powerful if she would let herself; but that, also like Melindy, she must quit. She knew, at last, that she could not pray, "Lead me not into temptation," and choose for her closest companionship one like Mr. Langham. "And that's the prayer the Lord gave us for a sample, ain't it?" Melindy had asked. After that Esther made as honest an effort as a young woman could to save Mr. Langham from any open avowal of his feelings, but in this she failed. The matter had gone too far before she discovered her own soul. Mr. Langham reached the hour when he all but demanded an interview as his right, and went away from it a deeply astonished as well as a disappointed man. He was not vain above the average of those born to good fortune, and petted alike by family and circumstances. It simply had never occurred to him that any girl whom he should honor with his preference could refuse so great a gift as himself. It had been a very painful interview to Esther, because, compelled by the truth to admit that, but for his religious views, or want of views, she might have answered differently, he tried to argue with her. And she was not ready to argue. What she wanted to do was to live Christ, not argue about him. Mr. Langham had gone away at last, hurt, disappointed, almost angry, but by no means hopeless. He simply could not conceive of this as being a final decision. He told himself that the girl was under the influence of an unnatural religious excitement, that he ought to have waited until the spasm of fanaticism connected with those special meetings had had time to subside. Ester, by reason of her home environment, was peculiarly susceptible to such emotions. She came of a long line of religionists who seemed every now and then to "awaken to the vital need or imminent peril" of some of the Lord's children, and seemed never to have discovered that the saving of individual souls was a losing game. Of course he need not wonder that a girl so trained lost her head as soon as there was a special wave of emotional effort. When she had had time to think sanely, she would surely realize what an absurd barrier of sea foam she had tossed up between them. He, a church member and Bible teacher, being objected to on religious grounds! That would be enough if he were an unbeliever. Because of this method of reasoning, when the first warmth of his indignation subsided, Mr. Langham commenced a carefully arranged series of daily courtesies and kindnesses that were harder for Ester than aloofness would have been, and bided his time. But the religious spasm did not pass. On the contrary, as the weeks passed, and then the months, and the long vacation came again into view, Mr. Langham went away for the summer with the strange conviction pressing upon him that from a sense of duty, and that solely on religious grounds, this strange girl meant to deliberately and permanently turn away from a position such as could not surely be expected to be offered more than once in a lifetime. However, something was gained when Mr. Langham began really to understand that he had been refused. It had all been hard for Ester, harder than, without having lived through the experience, she could have imagined possible. She had been mercifully preserved from that false and foolish idea which some girls indulge, that she must be a lifelong victim to a hopeless love. She knew that the power of Christ over the human heart was supreme; that he was able not only to control and subdue, but also to eradicate, if necessary, any human passion. Yet there were times when the girl shed a few bitter tears, and asked herself if she could ever hope to overcome entirely the sense of loss and loneliness. The passing dream had been very sweet. Sometimes she wondered if Melindy still missed Jim Slicer. Not a word of it all was written to her mother. At first she could not write. There was no question awaiting decision. There had not, even from the first, been much doubt in her mind as to her father's and mother's opinions. Why should she burden them with the story of a loss? For, at least, she had lost a friend. When the months and then the years passed, and Ester, living her full, eager life, grew heart-free again and knew that she was happy, with a happiness that her young girl days had never known or even imagined, surely there was no occasion, then, to tell the story of that closed volume. Was there not a sense in which it was not her story, but belonged exclusively to Mr. Langham? It is possible that she was helped to more rapid soundness by the fact that in the middle of Professor Langham's second year of disappointed ambitions he received and accepted a call to an Eastern college, having succeeded in convincing the college board that there were important reasons why he should make the change at once. Over his going Faith Farnham was curious, and questioned as closely as her sense of propriety would admit, and learned nothing. She talked much about him, and by degrees Ester came to understand that her friend's interest in him was deeper than her own had ever been. "Poor Faith!" she said softly to herself when this conviction took full hold upon her. "And I sent him away! If he could have stayed, perhaps—" Then she remembered that there had been a time when it smote her like a blow to think of Faith being in his company and she left out. Over that she smiled. "People change," she told herself. "I shouldn't mind it now. If he were only, different, I should like it for her; but perhaps even he could help her." She did not intend the fine sarcasm involved in that phrase, "even he." It floated through her mind unawares. Meantime there came to Ester that indescribable joy like unto no other that this life has for us. She won her first trophy for the cross. Selma Victor took a firm, jubilant, outspoken stand for Christ, and owned, and was glad to own, that it was Ester who had won her. She had been frank, too, in her confession. Selma was always frank. "It wasn't the kind of religion you had when you first came to our house that interested me," she told her. "I didn't care two straws for that. I had seen the same kind hundreds of times, and always poked fun at it, on the sly, so as not to trouble mother. But one time, well, it was before Katherine had the fever, all of a sudden it seemed to me you got different. I never have understood what made it, but it wasn't possible not to notice and think about it. Ester, honestly, your very face looked different. I used to watch you and study you, and think that if I could return to the days when I believed in fairies, I should know that the original Esther Randall had been spirited away and another one dropped into her place. I don't hesitate to tell you that I liked the new one 100% better, but I was always curious over the change. Don't you know yourself, Ester, that you suddenly, why, in a single night it seemed to me, were different?" "Yes," said Ester, with a sweet solemnity. "I know it, Selma, and I have great joy in explaining it. I was a Christian before that day, but I was never happy in my religion. It was half-hearted. I lived always in an interrogation. Ought I to do this? May I do that? Must I deny myself the other? It was a dreadful life, Selma. Don't you ever try to live it. On the day I fully settled it that Jesus Christ was to be the center around which every act and word and thought of mine were to revolve forever, and opened my heart to the fullness of His promise that His grace was sufficient for every temptation, why, He simply fulfilled His word, Selma, and came. Look at the verse to night when you read, and see how plain the promise is. 'If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him and he with me.' Think of it, the intimacy of the relation." "But," said the young disciple, wondering, curious, "what did you do, Ester?" "Opened the door," said Ester, with a bright glad smile, "and he came in and took possession. Try it, dear. It can be understood only by experience." CHAPTER 23.